upside surprise, Hao. Your reaction?
Yeah, well, I think it's much better than what the market was expecting, especially the industrial production number and also the retail sales number. But if you look at in December, the capacity utilization rate for the steel furnace is actually surging up. So it seems to be quite a bit of activities going on. So industrial production is beating us in terms of expectation. And retail sales is a bit of a puzzle. I mean, to be honest, in December is
well, who can get out to shop? That's the thing. That's the point here.
Well, I think in December, they pretty much remove all the restrictions, right?
So but that's only 1 month overall. I mean, that's what we were looking at is just December. But, I mean, but then people stayed in because of the fear of getting COVID on top of things.
That's right. So that's why it's puzzling. But I believe that the market will welcome such a number.
What does it tell you about growth next year, then? Do you think that, that 5% is pretty tangible at this point?
Well, if it's keep going this way, right? So then if it keeps beating expectation in such a huge way, then yeah, it's possible. But otherwise, I would say that 3% this year and then 3% for 2023 is quite possible.
You look at this GDP bounce, though. 2.9%. We will look at 1.6%. Okay, now that tells us about, of course, and informs us as to what happened for the full year. And well, GDP for the full year was 3% as opposed to 2.7%, which was the estimate.
Right. That's right. I think for 2022, then I think 2%, most people would think that it's a reasonable number they can live with. But I think going forward to next year, right? So if we don't see a recovery in the property sector, and also next year, net export is not going to help us, right? So and then if property sector takes more time to recover, then it will affect consumption as well, right? So next year is actually going to be more challenging than this year.
I'm taking a look at the jobless rate. That's actually went lower, 5.5%. I know these numbers don't really show what the real picture of what's going on, but are we seeing really people going back to work enough to really kind of boost consumption in next year? I mean, what are you seeing on the ground when you've been traveling?
Yeah, exactly.
It really depends on how many people were looking for jobs, right? So that's how the economists calculate jobless numbers, which can be a little bit
But crucially, 16 to 24-year-old jobless rate is 16.7%, and this is something which has been highlighted by the authorities. That's a deep concern.
That's right. I think in the middle of last year, it was 20%, as high as 20%. So now it's actually improving as well. But I think for 2022, if you look at the anecdotal evidence, all the stories that's going on, all the uni graduates, finding it very difficult to find jobs. People are going for, some very sort of less meaningful jobs than they should be, than they're supposed to be, then I think, from 20% youth jobless rate to now 16% is somehow an improvement on the margin as well.
On the margin, yeah. I'm just wondering when it comes to this excess savings, everyone's talking about that, right? That they've piled up, it's almost at records, and how they're going to spend it is the key question. Do you think that that's really going to go into consumption, or do you think people are just going to be a little bit more cautious about, keeping those savings in the bank or whatnot?
I think if you look at what happened in 2022, right? So in this 1 year, the increase in savings is more than the previous 3 years combined. Right, so it's just huge. And if you look at the PBOC survey, it's saying that people has more inclination to save and less inclined to spend. And therefore, unless the outlook improves substantially, it's hard for me to imagine how people go out and just spend it all.
Okay, now we're getting a portent of the future here as well, with the first population decline for the country here since the early 1960s, right? This, on top of that overcount that they've already admitted to, I mean, this is the demographic challenge that China is facing, is it not? That we are going to see a declining population, and not only that, an aging population on top, especially this year when people have not been having children for obvious reasons, given the lockdowns. How do they deal with this?
To be honest, most countries are facing similar challenges. So I think in terms of birth rate, I think South Korea is probably the worst, the lowest in the world, and I think China is not far behind. I think at the moment the birth rate is about 1.1. And I think South Korea is about 0.9. I think going forward, because demographic is sort of a secular long-term trend, it's very difficult to reverse it. So even though, for example, a couple of years ago, we promote this two-child policy, but ever since then, birth rate actually declined. And marriage rate in 2022 actually declined substantially as well for obvious reason. So I think, it is a very difficult challenge to deal with.
Yeah, so that's a structural problem. I'm just wondering, in terms of this year, the external picture is not looking too good either. When it comes to manufacturing and the demand for that, are the problems going to be more external than next year or this year for China? Than the domestic side?
That's right. If you look at the exports to the U.S. and also to Europe, right? So year on year, I think for last month it's down 20% year on year, right? So it's very substantial decline. I think the Fed's policy is really trying to temper with the U.S. demand, trying to suppress it so that you can lower the inflation rate. So in so doing, then it creates less demand for Chinese goods. And so going into October, the effect is already very obvious. And also if you look at the PPI, the deflation in PPI, which is the upstream sector, is already worse than expected. So therefore, I think going forward in 2023, this year, net export is not going to help us in terms of growth.
I'm just wondering, in terms of just overall, looking at data now. I mean, this used to be really all important. Is it that important now to even look at these sort of headline numbers versus high frequency data, mobility,
That's right.
How much do you actually spend time looking at this data versus high frequency data now?
To be honest, I don't really look at this official data anymore. Firstly, it lacks credibility, right? Yeah. So it's just any number they want to put on. And I think secondly, high frequency data give you a picture of what is changing on the margin, right? So that gives you more sense in terms of where the market is going.
Okay, so if you're an investor, what are you going to be looking at? What are your takeaways from these numbers in particular?
Today's number. Well, I think on paper is better than expected, and given that we don't have better source of information available, therefore we choose to believe it, especially now the market is on positive momentum. So it actually makes people feel good or justified how far this rally has come.
Yeah.